Okay, I've started the recording and yeah, I'll switch on the transcripts as well.
Yeah. And Tuhin, you can tell me which part you don't want. I will skip them out in the
Yeah,
chat.
sure. One second,
Cool.
just trying to. Yeah. So just let me know when you guys want me to get started.
I guess we are beyond the hour mark, so we can start actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, Vivek, did you want to introduce him? I guess you have a much better introduction planned out.
I don't know better. So I think Tuhin is a PhD student at Columbia and is also working with New York Times as he's going to present today. And I recently saw he also got Amazon PhD fellowship, something, and also some fellowship from Columbia University. I don't know
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So the fellowship is from Amazon and Columbia together. So
Yeah,
it's like a joint fellowship. But yeah.
okay. And he's advised by Samandra Merson. I think I pronounce it right.
Yeah, it's Maranda Murishan. Yeah. She's
Okay. Okay.
Romania. So
Yes, and I think he has lots of interest in language understanding and generation, especially like non-literal languages. Like he will talk about a lot of this, and also like how to acquire knowledge about common sense, reasoning, and other types in the world. So, without any more, I hand over to him to present. And thanks for coming and presenting in the seminar on such a short notice. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Vivek, for this introduction. So yeah, I guess like as Vivek mentioned, like my research interest is mostly on like implicit and non-literal language. And one of the reasons why this is particularly very interesting to me is because like majority of the NLP research, like whether it's understanding or generation, like mostly focuses on like text which is literal and like which is often more common in like the web or like everything. But I guess like for non-literal or figurative language, like the challenge is like a lot more because like it not only requires understanding of the text, but it's also like deviating from the norm, and then it also requires world knowledge, common sense to be able to properly understand it. So let's just see some examples. Like it's basically like very common in everyday life, right? For example, like if you take Adele's like very famous song, like Water Under the Bridge, it's like a very popular idiom. I definitely am a big fan of like Amy Winehouse. So like she said in her like song, and life is like a pipe. So this is again like a figurative comparison, like simile. If you listen to the song by Simon and Garfunkel, April Come She Will, where like they're totally trying to personify like women's changing moods through like the different changing seasons. So I guess like for these sort of understanding or like even generations, I guess like we require a lot of like connotative or common sense or world knowledge, which is definitely very important for in general natural language understanding and generation. So, I mean, when I talk about figurative language, like it's very vast. Like there's irony, there's metaphor, there's simile, personification, idiom, hyperbole, puns, a lot of it. So it's like a very big space. Um, and the most of the research on figurative language has been on detection. Like people have been like working on sarcasm detection for like ages now. There has been a lot of work on detecting metaphors or like detecting hyperboles or similes or these sort of things. So I guess like yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive that people have been trying to work on these sort of like detection benchmarks, and it definitely helps us like understand text or sentiment or like implied meaning in a better way. But one of the questions is what are we still missing here? So I guess like the things we are missing is like figurative language generation, figurative language interpretation, and figurative language evaluation. So I think like these are very important questions which basically we need to address in order to like claim that our computers have kind of like understood language or being able to generate language holistically. So one of the bigger challenges in figurative language generation is like there is no large parallel corpus of non-literal to literal text to usually train generative models. And say like, even if a large parallel corpus exists, so learning the distribution of existing data and sampling from it will just likely mimic or memorize rather than generate like truly novel or like creative text. And then one of the things which I mentioned earlier is like, it has a very strong requirement for common sense reasoning and world knowledge. So we basically need to like address all of these things in order to be able to generate like fluent and meaningful figurative language. And I mean, there is a bunch of work in figurative language, especially from myself and like also other several people in the recent like past years. Of course, due to interest of time, I cannot go into a lot of these, but I think like my first work in figurative language generation was generating sarcasm, which was like, it feels like it's been a while now. This was just like in the beginning of the pandemic. So I guess like this was an ACL 2020. So I'm going to be talking mostly about this work because this is like really was a fun work which I did. And then more recently, in the last few months, I've been working on something on generating sarcasm through a model in the loop approach, which I'm also going to talk about. And like some of the results are very impressive, and it's just like it's beyond my comprehension how far we have come that we can like generate these sort of texts. So let's first look at the like reverse retrieve and rank for sarcasm generation with common sense knowledge paper. And this was work done in joint collaboration with my advisor and Nanyun Peng at UCLA. So when I talk about sarcasm generation, I think like the task which I'm interested in is like starting from an evaluative non-sarcastic utterance. I want to generate a sarcastic utterance that keeps the speaker's intended meaning. So for example, if you see here, like if a non-sarcastic utterance is, this is a horrible music video, like a sarcasm generated by my model was, this is a great music video. Let's take a look at the ear damage. So you can immediately understand like there is like some sort of like reversing of balance, because like someone says horrible music video, you are already saying great music video. But if it's a great music video, why would it like cause ear damage to you, right? So it's already like sort of like contradictory. And then like one of the important things here is like also that a bad horrible music video is loud and it can cause ear damage. So that's some sort of like common sense, which is like implicit, which makes the sarcasm a lot more like believable or even acceptable to the general audience. So I guess this is one idea which we thought would be good. And then we proposed end-to-end model for this. So let's take a look at that. So as I told, like, of course, there is no already parallel data for non-sarcastic to sarcastic, right? So I guess typical supervised generative modeling will not work here. So I guess given the lack of training data for sarcasm generation, we here propose a novel unsupervised approach that has three main components inspired by the sarcasm factors. So one is like reversal of valence, one is retrieval of common sense context, and then ranking of semantic incongruity. So these three R's together form R3, which is the name of our system. So here, I'll just very slowly show the entire like pipeline one step at a time. So let's say you have a non-sarcastic utterance input, which goes by zero visibility in fog makes driving difficult. Okay, so now our task is to change this to a sarcasm. So this you can see is a non-sarcastic input. So the first thing is what you can do is like, you can reverse the valence here. Sorry. So when I say reverse the valence, what you can do is like you took the zero visibility in fog makes driving difficult, and then you basically reverse it. So you can say zero visibility in fog makes driving easy. Now you can see this is already approaching towards sarcasm, because like you already know that, yeah, maybe like zero visibility in fog can cause accident or something. So it's never easy. So I think like if you even just flip a word, it can still like proceed towards sarcasm. But the problem here is not very creative, right? I mean, this sort of thing is just very rule-based and like anyone can do. So I guess like, how can we make it even more sarcastic? So the thing is like, here we definitely need some sort of like external common sense. So why is zero visibility in fog makes driving difficult? So the reason for that is like, there is a causal relation. The causality is that zero visibility in fog makes driving difficult because it causes something like accident. So we definitely need some sort of an external common sense knowledge base, which is going to tell me that why this sort of cause and effect thing happens. So to do this, what we do is like, we take the like literal input and feed it to Comet. Now, of course, the obvious question being like, what is Comet? So Comet here is GPT-2 based model that is fine-tuned on ConceptNet. So ConceptNet, as we know, has like different sort of like common sense ontological relations, right? Which can tell you like cause, location, after effects, or these things. So when a language model is fine-tuned on something like ConceptNet, it has like more generalization capabilities of like common sense. So here, if you feed zero visibility in fog makes driving difficult, it tells you that it causes accident, getting ticket, visibility problem, visibility loss, or lose your car. So of course, there are multiple relations and we only care about the best relation. So we take here accident. So now, given this input, we fed this to comment and got the output accident. So now the next step, what we want to do is we want to retrieve like different sorts of common sense context which contains the word accident. So for sarcastic effect, we make sure that the word usually is in the beginning or in the end. So you can see that along with accident, if you search a normal like sentence corpus, then you will get different sentences like suffered 3 cracked ribs in the accident. I injured my spine in a riding accident. So different sort of sentences with accident. So now basically, as I told in the first step, I had the valence reversed output. Zero visibility in fog makes driving easy. And now I have a bunch of these like common sense contexts based on accident. So now how can I use these two together to make sure that like some sort of sarcasm is created? So for this, we introduced our third factor, which is the ranking of semantic incongruity. As we know that in sarcasm, like semantic incongruity is like a very important factor, right? Like it needs to be incongruent to your common sense knowledge. So say, for example, now you have the first sentence, zero visibility in fog makes driving easy. And then all these sentences which were retrieved with accident. So you take the first sentence and every sentence from the retrieved context and form a pair. And then this pair is basically fed to a Roberta large model that is fine-tuned on the MNLI dataset. And the reason for this is we don't have like a incongruity score in general, right? So we want to take a proxy of an incongruity score, which is already obtained from a pre-trained model. As we know that because the Roberta model gives you like entailment, contradiction, and neutral scores, so definitely for every sentence pair, you can get that. So now imagine the first sentence and then suffered 3 cracked ribs in the accident, or the first sentence and I injured my spine in a riding accident. So every sentence pair will get a contradiction scores from the Roberta large model fine-tuned on MNLI, right? So then the next step for us is to rank all these sentence pairs based on their contradiction scores. And then the best one which we are getting is the one which you see in the top, that zero visibility in fog makes driving easy, suffered 3 cracked ribs in the accident. So you see that from our input, how we can finally get here. So it basically now contains all the factors of sarcasm which I described. Like it has the reversal of balance, it has some sort of like common sense context, and then also it's very semantically incongruent, right? Because if zero visibility in fogs made driving easy, then typically you wouldn't like suffered 3 cracked ribs in the accident, right? So you see like this is some sort of evaluative bad thing happening, but you're saying it in a good way. So through this entire end-to-end pipeline, we are generating like the sarcasm from the beginning. So like this is R3, which is like the top is reversal, and then the bottom is retrieval, and then to the right you see ranking. So these three fit together to form like R3. So
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it seems like the example, the first example sentence had 2 parts to it. It was the zero visibility in the fog, and then makes driving easy, right? Yeah. And the makes driving easy, then suffered cracked ribs in accident. That's, you're going to get a contradiction there likely. But the zero visibility in the fogs, I cracked ribs in accident, that's going to be like an entailment, right? So so how do you, like, so I'm thinking you might sometimes get an entailment with these second sentences, depending on, because there are kind of these 2 parts in the first sentence that are contradictory to each other.
Of course, yeah. So this is the reason why we are ranking multiple candidates, right? So the thing is, like, if there is something which is getting entailment, that will be very low in the list, right? So we are retrieving a bunch of like common sense context, and then every time we are ranking this with the with the valence reversed output, like zero visibility in fog makes driving easy. I mean, I agree with your point, but then you have to take the entire sentence, right? So just, we are not computing the entailment just based on zero visibility in fog. Like, we are taking zero visibility in fog makes driving easy, the entire sentence, and then ranking based on the like scores. So if something is entail, that will be very low in the list. So something which contradicts is going to come very high in the list. So you can see the two sentences, zero visibility in fog makes driving easy and suffered 3 cracked ribs in the accident. These are very contradicting to each other, like probably a contradiction score of 95% or something. So, I mean, that makes it more approachable in the sense that this is ranking based on semantic incongruity. So it's just like a weekly supervised.
Yeah. Right. Did you look at stuff as well that was kind of the high in the entailment? I'm curious if those also sarcastic.
So I guess like we did, and I'm going to talk about this in the ablation, that like we did also an ablation where we were not ranking, but just like randomly taking a sentence from the list and then appending it and seeing if this is sarcastic or not. Yeah, of course, in some cases it would be, but then overall, like the ranking step made it better. So I think like this was the ablation which we performed, and I was anyway going to talk about it in the next
slide. Great, thank you.
Sorry, Vivek has a question.
I have the same thing, like you are relying on the MLI, and I have seen the MLI data set. It's pretty much simple, like, and there's also domain differences. Like, I don't think so MLI would have such a difficult, they are generally from caption, I think. So like, which is a sentence which has mixture of both contradiction followed, or like two parts which are.
Yeah. No, I mean, definitely. I totally agree with your point. And I guess like the proof of concept here was, I mean, in general, based on when we tried with our experiments, we saw that like these were very simple questions, right? Like, for example, zero. And I think like MNLI is very good in terms of identifying antonyms, right? So like, you see like driving easy and accident. So these sort of things, it'll like, because it's a Roberta-based model again, right? So like they have very strong word associations. I think like in general, we were seeing very good like entailment scores here. Of course, if this is very complex sentence or something, it might not work. But again, for us, the important thing was like to develop a proof of concept in terms of incongruity scores. And like, this was probably the cheapest way we could get incongruity scores, right? Because otherwise you would again have to like label data for incongruity and then like train a classifier and get the scores. But I think like what we tried to show is like this module can easily be replaced by, say you label like 10,000 examples like for incongruity and then like train a classifier and get like a score. So you could easily replace that and it would still work. So I think like it was mostly a proof of concept to show that this is a way you can get the incongruity measures.
Yeah, and I really like work which use other things to do something.
Yeah, because I mean it's like, yeah, sure. I mean entailment not only needs to do for like NLI, right? I mean you can use
it should work for
downstream. I mean, people have been using now NLI in like summarization, factuality, evaluation also. So I guess like, I mean, if you can use it in a downstream task, it's always like fun.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So I guess like coming to like the point which I was just talking about that. So here also we conduct ablation. So like say, so just the reversal of valence, like just remove the other two parts, like ranking of semantic incongruity and retrieval of common sense context. Then no reversal of valence between just the context. Then no semantic incongruity, which I was talking about. Just randomly take a sentence from the context and then just append it. And then there was already a state-of-art model like published by Mishra et al. In 2019. And then there was our full model, which was like RQ. And then we also compared it with human written gold sarcasm. So, let's take a look at the results. So of course, for these sort of like tasks, it doesn't make any sense to like use Blue, Rouge, or Meteor or these sort of metrics. So I guess like human evaluation probably is the more like reliable like metric. So what we did was like, it was important for us to evaluate like the generations based on like 4 dimensions. One was creativity, one was how sarcastic it is, one was how humorous it is, and the 4th was like, of course, because it's a retrieval based approach, it could still have like some problems with grammar. So I guess like how grammatical it is. So as you can see here in the like bar chart, like our FM model is the yellow model, and the different other, and the human is red, and there are different other like small ablations. So as you can see that for creativity, actually, our model scored the best by Ebner judgments, even a little better than humans. For sarcasticness, of course, I mean, it's a given that humans would be more sarcastic. So like humans won, but then our model was the second. And then for humor also, it's the same trend. And the different other ablations which I talked about, right? Like the RV, no RV, or the NSI. So like these were all like decently performing, but then they were like still like lower than our full model, which kind of shows that all the three components when pulled together definitely makes for like a better sarcasm. So the theoretical factors kind of like at the end of the day make it more better to like generate sarcasm. And then of course it was better than the state of art which was published, and it was like a sequence to sequence model, so it produced a lot of ungrammatical output. So like it was pretty easy for us to like beat the state of art, but that was anyway not our goal. We just like put it as a method of comparison. So yeah, I mean, I guess this was like how we kind of started with like a proof of concept, and then like kind of used theoretical underpinnings to like generate sarcasm end to end. So the code and data for everything is like already there. So if anyone is interested, like feel free.
So how did you did the evaluation? You asked the human about all these phone metrics on a
Yeah,
scale?
yeah. So like we recruited like workers on Amazon Enter, and then like told them to like score them on a Likert score rating of like 0 to 5, because like it's again very subjective. And then like also like for every utterance we recruited like 3 to 4 workers, and then like computed like some sort of like reliability annotation using like kappa. And I think it was like moderate for all the metrics, because like something between 0.4 to 0.6 for like annotated reliability. So it was pretty.
Yes. I also interestingly, I also feel like many of the scores like are very close by, even after just by RV, you are able to get some like pretty good sarcasm.
Yeah, because like sometimes like going to the doctor on a Sunday morning is horrible. You say going to the doctor on a Sunday morning is excellent. So like something like, or like stuck at the dentist office for 5 hours. This is really annoying. So you just change annoying to excellent. So like, I mean, typically humans like, or like lazy humans, how they generate sarcasm is like that. And this comes to my next part of the talk, where like that sort of thing is very easy, just flipping the sentiment. But then like creative sarcasm is very difficult. And this is exactly what I'm going to talk about in the next part of the thing. So again, like this was already like a work which we did in the beginning, because there was not a lot of work in sarcasm generation and we wanted to take a first step. So one of the limitations of our approach was definitely that the sarcasm generation we described had like a template. Like you see, it was always like 2 sentences, A plus B. So while humans often use an additional sentence as a template, typically sarcasm is fluent, and human generates sarcasm in like one single fluent sentence, right? So like 2 sentences can be like some sort of like caveat. So so we want to like understand like how sarcastic is the average human. So of course there is no definite answer, and I would like to say it depends. So to test this, we create an AMT task where we ask humans to change a literal sentence and then like paraphrase it to sarcastic. The only caveat is like we want to just test basic general human. We didn't add any qualification task. And I want to show like, let's see how the average human like writes sarcasm. So we'll be going through a couple of examples, and I want to like show that how bad Turkers are on AMT. And like, so this is a literal sentence. I just went for a shopping spree and bought a $2,000 bag. So these are 3 humans on Enter who were like given very explicit instructions, and see the kind of sarcasm they have written. The first one wrote, I just went for a shopping spree and bought a bag for only a measly $2,000. Sure, I mean, the use of measly is interesting, but it's not like very creative, right? It's just like adding one single word. The second human wrote something totally arbitrary, like $2,000 bag, just a quick trip to the store. And then the third person didn't even like write a grammatical sentence. They wrote, could have had a new car for that much, which is again problematic, because I don't think like in $2,000 you can get a car. So anyway, like let's see other examples. So like this literal, when I moved into my apartment, it was full of bugs. So the first person wrote, my new apartment was a pest palace. I mean, okay, I understand it's not very bad, but it's not like really sarcastic. The second person wrote like totally garbage, because a lot of luggage and etc. things having our side, it was useful to or needed, like it's totally grammatically incorrect. And then the third person wrote, I welcome the bugs in my apartment because this is what renting an apartment on this side of the town is all about. Now this is good. So I guess like some humans are good, some humans just totally like are awful. This is the final example I want to show. Like I have someone always asking me questions about how to use mobile. So like the first person says, this person constantly asks me a question about how to use their phone. It's almost like there isn't an entire internet that explains how to do everything on the planet out there. I mean, this is very long. So I guess like the sarcasm somehow gets lost. It's not very funny. Or like people are always asking me how to use mobile because apparently they think I'm Google. This is still good. And then the third one is like really bad. Everyone thinks they're so smart but can't even use a smartphone. I mean, this is not really sarcastic. So I guess like average human is really bad in writing sarcasm. So if you want to crowdsource data for generating sarcasm from MTurks, it's going to be a nightmare. So the challenges here is like, clearly it's hard to hire Turkers who can be good and creative and will write high quality sarcasm. Of course, we can use qualification tests and more time to filter out bad workers, but this is a time consuming and moderately expensive process if we were to scale. So we identified the common problems here. So like what most Turkers don't get in that the reframing needs to be faithful to the literal. Like you cannot totally generate something abstract from the input literal. It should contradict the literal. Like there should be contradiction. And it also shouldn't be like too long. Like I don't want someone to write an essay, like when I say like make it sarcastic. So I think like, so we want to ensure that these things have to be like maintained. So how can we like make it easy? So how to make writing sarcasm easier for humans? So we like tried to like do a pilot experiment. So technically most literal inputs are evaluative statements portraying some sort of emotion, right? So to make it creative, the first step should be paraphrase it in a way that the original meaning and the emotion is retained, but at the same time, it adds some additional content to it. Like it could be humor or some sort of like common sense. So let's say this example, I just went for a shopping spree and bought a $2,000 bag. So what is the emotion associated with the situation? Guilt. So now the thing is like you can creatively paraphrase it by saying, I feel terrible about spending $2,000 on a new bag when I know there are people in the world who don't even have enough food to eat. So you see like here, there is like some sort of like a common sense context that is being added and in a fluent way, like because $2,000 is a big amount to be spending on a bag when there are people who can't eat. So these sort of creative paraphrase makes it very helpful to then write an eventual sarcasm. So let me show like a couple of creative paraphrases. So like the first one you already saw. The second one, I once lost my job and got mad. So the creative paraphrase is, I was livid when I lost my job and had to scramble to find a new one. Or like, I have someone always asking me questions about how to use mobile. So this is like constantly pestered by someone for help to use their mobile phone correctly is really getting on my nerves. So you see like, it's not changing a particular word, it's basically paraphrasing it and paraphrasing it in a very creative way so that the original meaning and the emotion is preserved. So our point is like, what if we take these creative paraphrases and ask the average Turker, okay, now make minimal edits in it. So let's say the first one, I just went for a shopping spree and brought a $2,000 bag. So here I'm already doing the creative paraphrase and then asking the human that, okay, how do you like feel about doing minimal edits? So now they change terrible to awesome. So if you see, I just went for a shopping spree and bought a $2,000 bag, this becomes, I feel awesome about only spending $2,000 on a new bag when I know there are people in the world who don't even have enough food to eat. So this is already very sarcasm. And then like the cognitive load on the humans reduced significantly low because I'm already giving them with the creative paraphrase and I'm telling them just make minimal edits to make it sarcastic. Like you don't have to write anything because the creative part I'm already doing and I'm telling you to just do minimal edits. Or like something like this. I have someone asking me questions about how to use their mobile. So the creative paraphrase is constantly pestered by someone for help to use their mobile phone correctly is really getting on my nerves. So here, really getting on my nerves, this part is flipped to really the best part of my day. So if you read the constantly pestered by someone for help to use their mobile phone correctly is really the best part of my day. So this way we can make humans write sarcasm more effectively without relying on their creative part, because not every human being is creative, right? So if you want really to scale this, so we probably can just introduce the creative paraphrase and tell them, okay, you do now minimal edits, which is still a lot easier task for the human. And now the bigger question comes is like, how do we create this creative paraphrase? And here we basically introduce this.
So how do you evaluate like the goodness of sarcasm? Like can you go back?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I can see the second one is more sarcastic than the first one.
Yeah.
So like, but how do you measure that thing? Like even
Yeah. So I guess like in this current work, what we are also trying to do is like, I mean, one thing is definitely human evaluation. And then the second thing, what we are also thinking of doing is like, there are already pre-trained classifiers which are trained on sarcasm data, right? So I think what we can do is like get like the softmax score, which is like a score between 0 to 1, right? For like sarcasm. So I guess like if something is already pretty high in terms of like sarcasticness, like say if it gives me a score of 0.9 or 0.8, so I already know that this is pretty sarcastic. Anything below 0.5 is pretty bad. Anything above 0.5 is good, but then if anything within 0.75 and 1 is like definitely good. So I think like a pre-trained classifier, because I mean, this is definitely one of the drawbacks of open-ended text generation, right? Because I mean, automatic metrics, like, because even if you collect human judgments and compute blue, I mean, the scores will not really reflect the quality of your generations, right? So I think like human evaluations and then also like these sort of like model-based score, which can tell you like, so I guess like, sorry about the break. So how do we create the creative paraphrase? So basically here we use a model in the loop approach. So what we are going to do is like, we are going to take the literal to creative paraphrase, like say like 25 to 30 examples which are written by human, which is not very difficult to collect. And then we are going to use these prompt and put it to the GPT-3 Da Vinci model. So of course, the GPT-3 Da Vinci model is now pretty like strong in terms of like in context or few shot learning. So they can generate very like high quality creative paraphrase. So once the GPT-3 model is outputting the creative paraphrase, what we are going to do is like use the NLI based entailment filter. Like if the literal and the creative paraphrase are basically entailing each other, then we take that output, and if they are not entailing each other or they're neutral, then we are resampling and again regenerating through GPT-3. So through this, what's happening is we are getting the creative paraphrase, and then we are giving this to the MTurk person, and then asking them, okay, make minimal edits towards negation. So then with the creative paraphrase, they're doing minimal edits to create the sarcasm. So eventually we went from the literal input to the sarcasm, but we had this model in the loop step where we basically make it a lot easier for humans to write sarcasm. And then, of course, to evaluate this, we basically, yeah, so we have some preliminary results. Of course, this is like ongoing work and like soon to be published. So I guess like what we did is like, so model in the loop with creative paraphrase actually 75% better than like just normal human written sarcasm on the internet. So if you just like take normal, if you just ask humans to write sarcasm from literal from the scratch, which I showed the examples were really bad. But when you introduce this type of model in the loop creative paraphrase, I think the outputs are really, really better. So in terms of like for crowdsourcing or like scaling up, this can really be a good method. And what we also did was like, we also prompted GPT-3 to write sarcasm directly from the literal. The problem, what happens there is like, sometimes it's sarcastic, but sometimes it really like generates hallucinations. So I think like it's really, paraphrase generation is still a easier task for GPT-3, but expecting GPT-3 to generate sarcasm is problematic because it can like end up generating racist or sexist text, or like it could also like generate something totally like deviating from the input. So I think like when we also evaluated that model in the loop with creative paraphrase, it was 52% better than just like GPT-3 written like literal to sarcasm. One of the questions also is like how to again scale it. So what we were thinking of doing in the future is like, we also want to automate the minimal edit. So you can see like constantly pestered by someone for help to use their mobile phone correctly is really getting on my nerves. So here the span getting on my nerves is something that is more important. So I guess like if we can also identify this automatically, then all we have to do is like tell the GPT-3 model that, okay, so this is the span and this is the sentence. Can you please negate it for me? So negation is like a relatively easier task for like a 175 billion model, right? So I think like then probably it can easily do constantly pestered by someone for help to use their phone correctly is really the best feeling. So I think like what we went from the input literal is that it's very creative in the sense that it is paraphrasing by adding a lot of information, and then it's also kind of like contradicting the common sense knowledge, right? You know that being pestered by someone is not really a good feeling. So I guess like, so this is the way we can actually scale and collect a lot of like data through crowdsourcing platforms, which is often a really, really painstaking point if you're like thinking of open domain generation. Like, I mean, you can create qualification task, but like imagine you're trying to scale it, like you're trying to like collect 10,000 instances. Like it's really difficult. You will have like 2-3 people who are doing your task sincerely. So I guess like, and even we have tried several things like increasing the pay or like choosing master Turkers, but nothing helps here. So like tasks like sarcasm requires like really, really good training. So I think like this model in the loop approach kind of like really makes it easier. So yeah, this is something which is ongoing and hopefully it'll come out soon. So I guess I can take like a small 1-minute break to ask if anyone has any question before I go to my final part of the talk. Yeah, sure.
So did you try hiring like so like professional comedians, right? So like if you were to compare against like build a robot to go skiing, right? You like you probably wouldn't compare them against me because I'm a horrible skier and I'll fall down. It's not going to show much, right?
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's like a comedian is kind of trained in these plays of speech, or a writer, and so like whereas a Turker, you know, there are probably some people at Turkers who are good at this, but there are trained experts in writing these sort of things. Right?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. I mean, one of the problems is definitely, I mean, you technically can't hire any comedian to write you like 10,000 examples, right? So if you need like data creation to scale, I mean, eventually you have to come to a crowdsourcing platform. Like you can create like, you can ask a comedian to write you at max what, like 100 example, 200 example. I think anything beyond that, it's impossible. And then like also imagine the amount of cost. Like you cannot really pay a comedian like $15 per hour to like generate sarcasm. Like they'll probably charge like, so I think like when it comes to scale cost, so I guess like eventually we do want to utilize crowdsourcing platforms, but also I think the whole experiment which I talked about is like how to make sure that we place minimal cognitive load on the humans, because like expecting the humans to read a literal sentence, think, and then be creative, and then also come up with sarcastic. So these are like a lot of tasks together which someone has to do. So I'm like, what if like what are the uses of these like big giant language models like GPT-3? If I can place the like significant burden on the GPT-3 model, so it already like, so it's basically just like decomposing a very difficult task into simpler subtasks, so that like finally when I'm giving it to the human to do, it's probably going to be a lot more easier. Like probably just flipping a sentence or like a phrase is a lot easier. Like as you can see in this example, right? Just changing getting in my nerves to the best feeling is a lot more easier for any humans. I guess you, me, everyone can do. But I guess like if I tell you that, oh, you think and come up with this entire sentence, then I guess like a lot of Turkers probably would not even have the patience, right? So I guess like, so that's what I mean. And with GPT-3, I guess it's very constant, right? The time is less. You probably like, it's not going to take time. So it's like just a code. So I guess you can really scale using a model in the loop. So I think this was the experiment we wanted to do, that if I decompose it into easier tasks, and then I say I give the model to do the difficult task, and then the human does the easier task, then does it make the process easier and like the quality better than just doing everything from the scratch? Because eventually our goal is probably to like create a big data set of literal sarcastic. And then I mean, just relying on Endtoend was like a nightmare. Like we spent like 2.5 months and like the results were not good. We spent like a lot of money. So I guess we were like, no, we probably have to like make use of something smarter. So I guess like, yeah, I mean, I guess because GPT-3 is so good in terms of like generation, so why not? So yeah, I guess like it's pretty exciting if you see like the outputs through this creative paraphrases like really a lot better than just like what the humans were generating you saw in the beginning, right? So yeah, that's a pretty decent step. Awesome. So I guess like I just have a final section of my talk, and then this is this is also I'm very excited about, and this is like this is really fun because like I worked with two very of my favorite researchers like Yejin Choi and Meredith Schwartz at AI2 last summer. And then yeah, I guess like this was like under submission at Tackle for the last 3.5 months. I couldn't really talk about it because of anonymity reasons, but then finally it got accepted with decision A. And I'm going to be presenting this in Dublin this ACL. So I guess like, yeah, I think Vivek has a question. I might just answer this.
I'm just congratulating you. I also got
okay.
recently tackled. So I
Oh,
know
yeah. I mean, for me, the experience was really good. I just heard like so many crazy stories about Tackle. It's very difficult. But I submitted the first decision I got was already B. So I guess it was conditionally accepted. So then I made just very minimal edits. And then like, it was very fast actually. I submitted in like October 1st. And by January 10th, I had like the decision made. So, I mean, for a journal, it's like pretty fast turnaround.
Congrats.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. This is really fun. So figurative expressions such as idioms are often like non-compositional, right? So for example, the idiom chicken feed denotes a ridiculously small sum of money instead of like food for poultry. Or like, for example, like, yes, I guess like it's very difficult for transformer-based LMs heavily relying on word content with very little evidence for nuanced composition. And this has been studied in prior work. Like, I think like you and Ettinger studied that like the representations from transformer models really don't have understanding of nuanced composition. So like if you feed chicken feed, the representation will a lot be towards the literal meaning like food for poultry than the non-literal meaning like ridiculously small amount of money. And like it's even more difficult with figurative language such as similes, which are often created ad hoc. For example, if you're comparing a person like saying like the person is a high mountain lake without a wind stirring it, and you're basically trying to imply that the person is calm. So like if you feed this to the transformer-based models, the representation will never be close to the representation of calmness, right? So for these sort of figurative like language, the representations from transformer-based models are not like suited towards non-literal. It's most suited towards the literal meaning. So our point is then like if we are truly claiming like natural language understanding capabilities, then like are they good when it comes to these sort of like non-compositional like phrases, so such as idioms or similes. So the thing is like, how can we test if language models can actually understand such figurative expressions? So there has been already like pretty like successful work in the past on like design like story close test, like rock stories, where you take a narrative and then the narrative basically ends in an idiom or simile, but then we have to choose a story ending where you not only need to understand the story context, but you also need to understand the figurative expression. So if you have to choose the next ending in the story, since it is ending in an idiom or simile, if you don't understand the figurative expression, you cannot typically choose the correct ending. And then along with the discriminative task, we also have a generative task where given the story containing the idiom, you also have to generate a plausible ending. So if you don't understand the meaning of the idiom, so you probably cannot generate. And then I have an example which is very funny. So it says that say X and Y were as friends, as X and Y were as thick as thieves. And then the GPT model says they were always looking for opportunities to steal. So they didn't really understand this thick as thieves means close friends. So they just took the literal meaning. So basically, ideally, if your language model understands the idiom, they should be able to generate a plausible ending. So through these two tests, we want to understand if language models understand idiom or similes. And let's take a look at these two examples. So the first narrative is, I'll ask you once more, how much did you make by a fighter taking that dive? The boy hesitated. $1,000. Lucky Luciano laughed. That's chicken feed. So here the meaning of chicken feed is basically what is going to dictate the story ending, right? So now we crowdsource these endings from AMT. And then if you see the plausible crowdsourced ending is, next time you sell your honor and dignity, try to hold out for more. So here it's basically reflecting on the idiom that chicken feed means a very small amount of money. And the implausible continuation is, well, I guess you made more taking a dive than you could have as a fighter. So basically, crowdsourced continuation of plausible and implausible, and then a model will have to guess which is the correct continuation. And then along with the guessing, it also needs to generate it. So basically, if it doesn't understand the idiom, then typically it will either guess randomly or it will guess wrongly. And so this was for the idiom. And then for the simile, similarly, like if you see the last sentence, his energy shifts once again. Now he feels like a high mountain lake without a wind stirring it. So the plausible continuation is he doesn't feel the same as he did. Now he's more calm. And the implausible continuation is he still had this rage pent up inside him and I could feel the intensity. So basically, we crowdsource plausible and implausible continuation, and the model has to guess which one is the correct continuation. So here we use some sort of like, again, theoretical understanding on how like L2 learners understand idioms. So what happens is L2 learners understand idioms either 57% of the times from the context or 22% of the times from the literal meaning of the constituent words. So for example, here, if a participant was asked to interpret the meaning robbing the cradle in the context of the sentence, Robert knew that he was robbing the cradle by dating a 16-year-old girl. So here, cradle is basically something which we associate the meaning with babies and indirectly with young age. And along with the context here, the inferred meaning is to date a very young person, right? So someone who totally never heard of the meaning of robbing the cradle as an idiom, they would technically guess and interpret using this, right? Like either the context or the literal meaning of the constituent words. So we use this like theoretical like understanding to actually also incorporate this in our models. And for simile, basically, again, like if you just hear something like the place was like Antarctica, so the first thing what comes into your mind is like, what is the property of Antarctica? Like Antarctica is cold, right? So you need that common sense to actually infer that. So again, this brings to what I was talking in the beginning, that like without common sense understanding, we probably cannot really understand figurative language. So these sort of like theoretical underpinnings really help us model this better. So here is something which is like our end-to-end model, and I'm gonna like talk about the different sections here. So bear with me. So like this is narrative in our data set. So sorry. So let's say this data set. So it says Isaac yelled across the cliff face to me. The rush of beating the tempest had his adrenaline pumping. I could see he was scared yet invigorated. Okay, man, you're up next, he yelled out to me. A sick feeling swept over me. Now, the next sentence is, it was indeed my turn to run the gauntlet. So run the gauntlet here is an idiom. And say we don't know anything about the meaning of the idiom. So now there are two continuations. I took a deep breath, convinced it was my time, and ran full speed away from the cliff. And another implausible continuation is I took a deep breath, convinced it was my time, and ran full speed towards the edge of the cliff. So if it's run the gauntlet, you probably will try to run away from the cliff, right? Instead of like towards the cliff. So our point is like, you don't know the meaning of the idiom, but how will you still decipher the meaning or like understand it? So this is the same like theory which I talked about, right? So either you can understand from the context or you can understand from the literal meaning. So say you want to understand from the context. So what you're going to do is like take the narrative with like the dashed box you see, like take this entire narrative without the sentence containing the idiom, and then feed this to again a common sense knowledge model. So here we use Paraphrases, which is a paragraph level transformer model giving common sense. And you see from this entire narrative, it gives us several common sense contexts, such as the narrator sweats, the narrator is seen as scared, the narrator wants to feel better. So from this entire like narrative, it gives us a lot of like common sense like meaning. So if someone is scared, they will probably run away from the cliff instead of like towards the edge of the cliff. Or like if someone like sweats, so it means they're already scared. So these sort of common sense can actually help you understand or like sort of decipher the meaning of the idiom. So this is the first model which we were using, the contextual model. And then also what I told, that sometimes like humans also decipher the meaning from the literal words. So say for example, we also feed this to the comment model trained on ConceptNet, and it tells us different sort of like inferences, like run is used to get exercise. Gauntlet is used as a weapon. So like these sort of things actually makes it easier for the model than just the Roberta model to infer the actual continuation. So how do we do this? So we take the inference and then we take the narrative, and then we take the plausible or the implausible continuation, and then we feed this to the Roberta model, and then just like kind of like fine tune it and get the score and take the argmax here to predict the correct label. So here the extra thing which we are doing is, instead of just taking the narrative and the continuation, we are also feeding it with relevant common sense inference so that the model can predict the correct option in a better way. And then this is the discriminative approach. We do something very similar for the generative approach as well. We take the inference and then a separator and then the basically the narrative containing the idiom, and then we fine tune the GPT-2 model. But during the inference time, what we are doing is, for every narrative, we have different inferences. So how do we basically combine these all together? So what we do is basically at time step T, say that there are n number of inferences. So we get the n number of next tokens. And then what we are basically doing is we are taking the sum of all these, and then like, so from the GPT-2 model, you will get like n number of vocabulary based array, right? So we sum them and then take the softmax from the sum of the array. So basically what's happening is it is taking into account all the common sense inference. The more amount of common sense you're feeding to the model, the better the model in terms of like generating the correct output. So you can just give the narrative and the continuation and fine tune the GPT-2 model. But when you are having n inferences along with the along with the narrative and the continuation, you finally need in the decoding time to combine all them together, right? So to combine them all of it together, what we do is like we feed it to the GPT-2 model and then get the logits in terms of the next tokens. Then we basically sum them all together. So here for like memory issues, we take 12 top inferences. So as you can see in the equation, we basically are summing them together. And then after the summing, we are taking the softmax. Usually in the typical autoregressive decoder, you would take softmax from the vocabulary for one. So here we are summing and then taking the softmax. And that way we are getting the next token. And then the next token is again appended to the context generated so far. And like, so autoregressively it keeps generating. So let's take a quick look at the results. So the table on the left is basically the discriminative results. So we basically on our idiom and simile benchmark.
Oh, yeah, I was just about to say for that. Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah,
There was some pop-up which was hiding.
No. Sorry, I just removed. So if we take a look at the results, so like for both idiom and simile, we test different sorts of models. Like the majority model is just like random, like two choices, you can guess any of them. So like you can see it's very low, it's 50. Then of course, because like these days zero shot models are already very powerful, right? So the GPT-2 XL and the GPT-3 and the unified QA benchmark. So like these are all very powerful zero shot models. So see, on our benchmark, these like do relatively average, like not that great. Even with few shot GPT-3 and like few shot PET, the performance is not that good, like it's somewhere around like mid 60s. If you fine tune Roberta like on our data set, then of course the performance becomes a lot better. And then the knowledge enhanced models, like if you're doing like, when you're doing the context model, then you're getting like some improvement over the supervised Roberta model. In our discriminative setting, we actually saw that the literal model did much better than the supervised model. Like the results are statistically significant. So the knowledge enhanced literal model in terms of like the knowledge from ConceptNet helped in both the idiom and the simile. And while this is still impressive, we should also note that the performance is significantly below human performance. Like human performance for this task was 92 and 95. And then we use like L1 speakers to like do our like human performance. So it's still significantly below the human performance. So there is like scope for like more improved models. And then coming to,
so this is the knowledge enhanced over the supervision, or it's without supervision?
Yeah, over the supervision.
Over the supervision. Okay.
Yeah, so like you take the Roberta model, like when you're feeding to the encoder, you're already feeding what you were normally feeding to the Roberta. In the Roberta model supervised, you're just feeding the narrative and the continuation, right? But in the knowledge enhanced, you're feeding the narrative continuation along with the common sense inferences.
Along with the common sense knowledge.
Yeah, so it's improving. And then like the performance is significantly a lot more enhanced in the generative model, where like it's because the discriminative experiment is still relatively easy because it's like
Easier
choosing
task.
one out of the two. But then the generative model is a lot harder because you not only have to like generate, but you also have to generate like meaningful and plausible continuation. So if you see the first column is the absolute results. So absolute means like how much percentage of the times is the model generating plausible output. So you see that the GPT-2 XL model, when just fine-tuned on our data, like generates plausible output 56% of the times for idiom and 60% for the simile. When you include context, common sense, then it improved from 56 to 68 and 60 to 68. When you do literal, for idiom, it dropped to 48, but for simile, it improved to 76. So which kind of gives us the impression that for context, actually, idioms do better, and then for literal, the simile does better. And this is kind of obvious, right? Which we also saw for the humans, because humans used 57% of the times context to interpret the meaning of the idioms, while for simile, you just cared about the literal meaning, right? Like the place is like Antarctica. You just want to know the property of Antarctica. So the literal, what is the literal thing that is associated with Antarctica? So of course, the literal results for simile were better than context, but the context results were better for idiom than the simile. And then of course, again, human performance is like still very much better than the model performances. And then we also did a comparative method where like, given all the outputs from GPT-2 XL, GPT-2 plus context plus literal and human, we want to see which one is the best. And then if there are cases where all are best or none is good, then we also account for that. And even here, for idiom, the context model emerged as the winner. And then for the simile, the literal model emerged as the winner. So which kinds of tells us that these sort of like common sense inferences actually help in terms of like generating better content. And I just want to end by showing this like results. I mean, there are of course a lot of good generations, but of course due to time, I couldn't include all of them. So if you see the narratives, which I already showed in the beginning. So like for the first idiomatic narrative, GPT-2 said, just fine tuning GPT-2 said he was lucky he made so little, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. But then the context model generates, lucky Luciano made much more money by doing other things such as fixing cars or selling drugs, which makes a lot more sense because here, lucky Luciano is basically laughing on the person for making very little money, right? So that's chicken feed. So he's laughing this from a position of supremacy because he had already made a lot of more money, right? So I guess like this is significantly better than just the GPT-2 model. And then for simile, this example, so it says, she said her monotone voice and echo of his sister, she was like a high definition TV. So like the simile high definition TV, if you really have to interpret the meaning and generate a plausible ending, the GPT-2 model says it was hard to tell what she was thinking, which totally doesn't make any sense, right? But the literal model says her voice was so smooth, you could hear every word she said. So basically a high definition TV has like very high quality, like pitch and sound and everything. So of course, like if the model, the comment output from high definition TV is like smooth, perfect, like high quality. So these sort of things definitely help the model steer towards like better generation. So I guess like this is the sort of learning that like in order to understand properly like figurative language, like common sense is very necessary. Like you can definitely do better with language models. Like I'm not discounting the fact that language models have already come a pretty good way, because if you see the results here, like the GPT-2 XL model just fine tuning is still doing 60%, which is not very bad. But I mean, if you want to just go above and beyond language model baselines, then I guess like including common sense from like theoretical understanding is definitely very helpful. Yes, I guess like that basically brings me to the end of my talk. If any of you have any questions, I'm happy to like take it and answer.
Yeah, we can give a clap to Tuhin for his time.
Yeah. So thank you. That was a horrible talk.
I could probably use some feedback from you on how to do better.
Questions? Okay. If no one, I can ask. So
Yeah.
what do you think in the, like, this is a very hard topic. I'm respectful, like you are taking this generation of like, I think it's pretty much, I think even simple language generation is hard, and you are going beyond that sarcastic idioms and all those. So what do you think is the next difficulties or things which are not yet addressed, or something which we need to think of more, where things are. One is, I guess, from the talk overall, it's look like the common sense and knowledge should be part of the model. But is there anything else also which you think should be there, which could help us in this direction? So what's your
Yeah,
thought on?
I mean,
I
in general, I feel there are several things which needs to be addressed. One is like there is very little resource, right? I mean, people have created a lot of data, but then like these data are mostly like collected from Twitter or something, which is like very noisy. So I think like we definitely need high quality crowdsourced data for like, because no machine learning research is really like possible if you don't have any data. I mean, you can claim that unsupervised models are good, and then like, but I mean, still unsupervised models are a lot behind supervised performance, right? So we definitely need people to kind of step up and create better high quality data, which probably people in the industry have a lot of budget and like a lot of money, so they can do it. And especially I'm also excited about the new direction of using like models like GPT-3, which is still a lot more cheaper and maybe in some way a lot more reliable to like, instead of having to rely on Turkers, probably use these models to create data. Of course, I mean, there can be caveats, but then if you use some sort of sophisticated filtering approaches to filter out the bad content, you can still leverage a lot. Because I mean, what is the point of these big language models if you can't really use it for like downstream tasks? So this is something which I'm definitely interested. Another thing which finally I want to say is like, I mean, sure, we are using common sense and it's like giving improvement, but I mean, these common sense models are also not oracle models. Like, I mean, the common sense models are also can be problematic. Like ConceptNet itself is noisy, or like, because I think Yejin had a very recent paper where she was also using like GPT-3 to generate more common sense data and then use a student teacher based training model to improve the generated common sense. So as the common sense models will be better, I think like these sort of models will also get better. And finally, one of the steps which I personally don't really believe in because I don't have the funding or money to do it, but there is also scaling law in language models, right? The more bigger the model becomes, like the more general understanding capabilities improve. So I think like, of course, a smaller model will definitely struggle because it's not, because there is only a limited amount of memory or knowledge you can encode in your parameters, right? So like the bigger model will definitely be somewhat better in these sort of tasks. So I guess this is something like if the model becomes better, so like easy, accessible, bigger models. And finally, another thing which I'm also currently working on is like lifelong learning or continual learning. Like we probably need to stop training models on one task because again, it forgets on another task. Like one thing which I have to accept that like for these figurative language, several figurative language shares common properties. So like multitask learning or like continual learning, like say you have a model trained on sarcasm detection, you can probably use the same sort of model for like detecting metaphors or hyperbole without forgetting the knowledge you've learned. So I guess like, so the T0 paper, like implicit multitask learning or like continual learning, these things will definitely make it, because I think what currently happens is like literal knowledge is a separate model, figurative knowledge is a separate model. I think that probably is not very healthy. So I think like, what about like you take a model that is trained on sentiment analysis and then do continual learning on sarcasm. So like it doesn't forget the knowledge from sentiment, but then uses that to like improve on sarcasm. So I think like these sort of ideas are very exciting. I'm like focusing and experimenting with some of these. So hopefully this will make it a lot more helpful for the community. But in general, I mean, it's still very hard and unsolved as a problem. So I think like,
Yeah, this
at
is a
least
hard problem, right?
we need to make like some steps, like at least if some people come up and work on these. So like this will
Yeah.
give future researchers more idea to work on.
Yeah. If you talk to Professor Allen also, she is also very much
Yeah,
in.
yeah. I mean, I'm very familiar with Ellen's
Yeah.
works. I guess like Ellen has been doing like a lot of seminal work on sarcasm, simile. So I guess like, yeah, I mean, no, these are very important work in terms of like detection and all these things, which probably, I mean, I have read all of these work when I started my PhD. So, I mean, I've shifted to generation because, I mean, a lot of detection work was already done, right? And especially with Bert, Roberta, I mean, the performance is already very good, like 90%. So like, I mean, this could be potential because the data sets are problematic, but I mean, I guess generation is definitely more challenging because like it's still not there.
Cool.
So, um, So I've got another question.
Of course.
So like, language is always evolving, right? Um, um, so, so I think in some of the examples you had, I had not, seen that particular kind of, like use of language before. Like,
Yeah.
someone's calm, but you describe them as a mountain lake without any wind, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I could kind of figure out what this was, but do you think that, with these, like, have you tried to like, I mean, should GPT be able to just like generate these, the, so these examples, they don't even have to be, so like, you could also make up things like chicken feed, right? It is an example where, okay, so I think that's a much older, phrase, but like if you were to say it now, I wouldn't be able to use common sense that, okay, chicken feed is very, very inexpensive, because I don't buy chicken feed. People don't buy chicken feed as much as they used to.
Yeah.
The chickens are raised on farms, and so like it could mean something else, but it could still have that meaning, right? It could be that it was chicken feed. It means it's very delicious because
Yeah.
chickens love it or something, right?
Yeah.
If people use it enough in a certain way, it can gain knowledge, or you put there's context in the text. It attains that knowledge. But like, is this the way forward to generate more creative and interesting, like language, to like try and train things like GPT-3 or the next generation to insert these somewhat non sequitur things, but that could potentially have meaning?
Yeah. No, this is an excellent question. And this is what I was talking to Vivek about, right? That the fact that pre-training on like giant corpuses, like say, for example, GPT-3 or GPT-2, these sort of models are pre-trained on like a lot of text from the internet, right? So of course, the representation of figurative language is very small compared to non-figurative or like literal text, right? So eventually when you train, like, of course, if like figurative language is 5% and literal language is 95%, it will basically overpower the figurative meaning, right? So what we need to do is like, but technically it's still a part of language understanding, and you can't really say that I have like achieved language understanding. Like on the glue benchmark, like you can get 95%, but if you're still not understanding non-literal meaning, because humans do that, like people are always having this debate that AIs have surpassed human in terms of language understanding. But I mean, language understanding on what? On one particular benchmark, not on like the entire language spectrum, right? So I think what we need is like, of course, what you said, to create more such resources. And like, I have been trying on my end to like, say, for example, this work was done at AI2, where like, it also took us like significant amount of money and effort to crowdsource like like a data set of 10,000 instances, because it's a lot of hard work, like to use crowd workers to write these things, verify these are good. Because ideally, if you don't have high quality data, like how can you even expect to learn something good? So of course, resources are needed. And the other thing which I'm very interested these days and I'm working on is like definitely continual learning, right? That if you learn a model or like a literal text, you should then be able to adapt that model's already existing knowledge on the like new task. Because otherwise what happens is like the model just overfits. Like it's probably good on one task, and then when you try it on a different task or like a different domain, it totally fails. So I think like if we keep learning, like continual learning or lifelong learning, I think like that's probably gonna be a really helpful thing. Because like say you train a model on idiom and then also use the same model, because there are a lot of like idioms like raining like cats and dogs, which is also like a simile, right? Which means very heavy. So I think like that sort of thing. So there is also a lot of like common overlap between things. So yeah, I think like these things, like more focus on like data equity in training, high quality resources. In general, just the focus that, I mean, there is also these languages which just exist. Like, just don't think that you are solving like a entailment task or a RT task and then language understanding is solved. So I think like, yeah, I mean, just the efforts take a long way.
Okay, so I think we are already out of time. So if you have other questions, you can always send to Tuhin or you can pass through me also. No worries. Thanks a lot. I want to thanks again to Tuhin and for the short notice talk, and it was very interesting and great talk. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye everyone. Thank you for
Bye,
attending.
everyone. Take care.